All right, I am going to start Photoshop here. I want to start every one of these by editing a couple photographs. Then I want to get into the metadata thing again a little more in depth than we did last time. So today I went through my hard drive. I use two platforms for storage of my photos. One of which I don't use much anymore, but it was very handy up until recently to sort through my best images so I could create folders, which you guys might think about doing. I use Google Photos. I'm going to share that window here real quick to just show you how I used to manage photos, and this may work for you just because of its connection and abilities with Google Drive. Present now a window here. Ignore. So what I used to do, and again, because of the new software I have for the website, I don't have to do this so much anymore. I have Google Photos. I suspect some or all of you are even familiar with it. And I have all my folders on here. And then I have albums. Now the albums are sorted into categories for me, not for customers necessarily. When a customer says, do you have anything in the Bear Paw Mountains? Then I'll go in into my Bear Paw Mountains folder and a few other ones I have, and I'll sort through my photographs and I'll pluck, based on what I know about their magazine, which ones that they want. So I'll just click on the ones that I think apply to them, and then I'll go up here and create a new album. And when I'm creating a new album, I create albums, then you'll see here, customer billings clinic, customer. Then once they've been invoiced, I add the invoice number in here for which ones they purchased, or licensed, I should say. And then I just keep that in perpetuity. So I know that if it ever comes back, well, we licensed that one, remember? And I'll go into this folder, which will match my invoice, and say, well, I don't think you did, or whatever. It's handy to have those there. So I also know that the following year, if they come back to me to license photographs, I'm not sending them the same stuff over and over again. So, if I come to you, the other benefit of this is that every one of my photos I edit, whether it's good or not, ends up on this website, even now. And it's a form of backup. So if my network storage server for my personal folders, we don't have to worry about those for the website so much anymore. But for my personal photos, which includes all my digital negatives, all my raw files, if something should ever happen to that, I know at least I have a high quality JPEG of the edited photos stored online. That's the benefit of Google to me. So this is part of my backup strategy. I have other backup strategies for my photos, but this is one of them. And so I go on here. So for what I was doing today, I'll put photos on here that have been edited. And I think I told you once already, I find with my photos, my photo editing history goes back to 2005, a long time ago. And the further back I go, of course, the photos I edit are edited much more poorly than the way I edit today. So there are some photos I'll go back and re-edit. Now, Google Photos has a method for highlighting photos called favorites. These are anything but my favorites. What I use it for is to highlight those that at some point I need to go back and re-edit. But I just don't like the color on them. I don't like the exposure. There's something about it I don't like. And so every time I run across one when I'm flipping through folders, I'll click on them and add them in here. And it also might mean I go back and revisit them, meaning I may go back to that site and just rephotograph it if I just can't fix it enough. For example, this one. This one here, remember we were talking about polarizer filters? This is an example of where I used too much of a polarizer. It made the sky too dark, and I can't easily fix that in Photoshop. So this is one of those where it's a nice green elevator. I want to go back and revisit, but it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Now, I'll still try to play with this in Photoshop a little bit. This might actually work as a black and white photograph because there's a high degree of contrast. But from a color photograph, it just doesn't work. And 99.5% of all photos I sell are color. I seldom sell a black and white photograph. Magazines don't want them. Ad agencies don't want them. So I don't actually, literally go out to make black and white photographs. I will turn color photographs into black and white if a customer asks, like a special project for like hanging art on a wall. But it's not where the money is, so I don't waste my time doing them. And if you're looking to this to create money, I encourage you to do the same thing, because you can't turn a black and white photograph into color, but you can turn a color photograph into black and white. So just start working on making color photographs, and it'll be fine. So I went in here, I plucked a couple images from that file. Now this is one I've edited before. It's not this exact frame, but it's from the same shoot that I edited before, but it was so long ago that I wanted to go in and see what I could do better, because the other one's a little muddy. It's soft. It's just not very good. So this is a grain elevator that I photographed this at about whatever sunset was on December 31st. I forget what year it was. It was about minus 40 degrees outside. I got caught in a cold front that came through overnight, not expecting it to be that cold. I left at like 3:30 in the morning. I didn't have the best clothes. I wasn't really prepared for the trip. I pretty much stayed in my truck the whole way. But when I came home and I saw the light hit this grain elevator, I said, I got to photograph it. And to this day, I still have no feeling in my right pinky because of it. I went out and the shadow here of me doesn't tell the whole story. I'm not sharing the right screen. Hold on. The shadow you see here doesn't tell the whole story. It makes it look like I'm standing. I'm not. I went walking across this field just off the road of Highway 2, and I thought I was walking across a field, when in reality I was walking into a ditch, and I plummeled down to almost to my neck, holding my camera in the air in the snow, put my hand down without gloves because I didn't think I need them. I wouldn't be there that long. And I kneeled. I think I even stood up covered in snow and started photographing this grain elevator. When I got in the truck, my hands were destroyed. It was horrible. I was outside for maybe 3 minutes. I can't believe with the cold, they got wet from my hands being in that snow. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. But anyhow, so what I do, again, to reiterate, again, I shoot everything in RAW. And what I do is very first thing I do is I check out what color scheme I want to use. Oftentimes I use Vivid more than any other, but sometimes I'll use landscape. But I always flip between all of them to try to determine which one works best. Portrait, if I'm shooting people, that does work best more often. Sometimes standard sometimes Vivid is too much color, and sometimes it's not. It's just a matter of preference, I get, and what you're trying to convey. Landscape doesn't work here, so I'm going to go with Vivid. Next thing I do is I select white balance. If you go online, you'll find out using your dropper tool, you can really accurately gauge what white balance you should use. And that's especially if you use a white balance card. Some of you have probably seen those. It shows you what true gray is. But the problem is it takes time and it gets in the way. Plus, when you do a white balance, a formal white balance, it doesn't leave any room for creativity. So I tend not to use it. I just kind of cycle through these and I try to determine which ones look good. Now that one's just too orange. This one's too cold. This one's not bad. Too orange, maybe. Tungsten is just different. Those never work unless you're indoors. Flash can work sometimes, but it's more of a greenish hue. So I tend not to use it unless I actually have greens in it. And I'll go back to auto, and I'll go back to auto shot. So the two that were best were generally as shot and cloudy. And I'll flick back and forth. Cloudy gives me the right amount of orange. Now, we can start working on exposure. Miranda, you and I have been talking about histograms. I believe, Kelly, you and I have had a conversation about histograms. This here, this upper right-hand corner, of Adobe Camera Raw is your histogram. It shows you in each of the channels, blue, green, yellow, RGB, red, green, blue. That's what that demonstrates. The color, the pixels, and the exposure of each pixel. Your mountain is too far to the left, it will cut off this mountain. It'll be a clean swipe right down the middle here. That means you've underexposed it. If it's too far to the right and does the same thing, you've overexposed it. So you kind of want to have your mountain of data. Generally speaking, it doesn't account for every type of photograph you make. You generally don't want to have the mountain of pixels cut off. You want to have it more towards the center, especially in a case like this. If I'm trying to shoot a scene that's in the dark, where maybe just someone is illuminated by the sunlight, then no, you might have cut off pixels. But in this kind of case, there aren't too many pixels here that I want to have pure black. So I'm going to try to avoid it. Likewise, because it's snow, I don't want to, have too many pixels that are pure white either. Now, Miranda, last time you and I were talking, remember we were talking about snow and how you underexpose in snow? That's exactly what my meter did here. My meter underexposed for the scene because it's snowy. So the meter sees this as pure white, like bright light. It doesn't know that it's snow. It's just a computer. It's a stupid computer. So it generally will make your exposures darker, which is what it did here. So you have to compensate for that. If you're photographing Black Angus by comparison, and again, Kelly, that's not going to affect you too much. But if you're photographing a wooded scene where you have anything that's black, like black bark, it will tend to overexpose it because it sees it as dark or night. So that you have to compensate for that a little bit. So I'm going to do that right now, and I'm just going to play with the exposure slider and see what happens. And I'm going to take it to where it looks about as good as I can get it by manually adjusting it here. So then I adjust it there. Now, what I don't like is that the whites tend to be a little bit too bright. So I'm going to adjust just the highlights and maybe the whites a little bit. Before I do that, because there's whites in the sky now, I'm going to quickly adjust. I'm just telling you how I do it. Some of this, there's no real sequence to it. It's just whatever catches my eye at that moment, I want to go and fix. Right now, I want to accentuate the blues. I did use a polarizer here. I am 90 degrees from the sun. That's when it works best. And it created a lot more blue in the sky than normal. But here along the horizons, you'll see it's not as colorful, and the whites don't poke out as much. So I'm going to go into my color mixer, and I'm going to accentuate the blues. I'm going to make the blue skies just a little bit darker. Remember, I can go all the way down. It's just what your preferences are. I can't go all the way down because it really accentuates this problem down here along the horizon. So I don't want to do that. I want to go as far as I can get away with without making that look too obvious. Now, the colors down here in a blue sky, they tend to be either yellows or aquas. So then I'm going to go into aquas and I'm going to try to make those darker. And see, it goes away even more, but it creates more of a band here. I don't want that band. So I can't go too far on aquas. I'll go to like right about there. That's about as good as I can do there. Now, yellows, if you want to see if the yellows have pixels there, just turn over to your saturation slider and push yellows all the way to the right. Nope, there's no yellows there because those pixels would have really turned yellow. Then I'm going to turn orange. Those aren't orange. So I'm guessing they're probably magenta or just pure white then maybe. So what I'm going to do then, there's not much I can do there except go back to basic, which are the main controls, and push my white down a little bit to try to take care of that. Now I'm going to zoom in at 50% to pay close attention to the noise and see what the noise looks like. Noise doesn't look too bad. Now I'm going to go back to 100%, which is how people would see it. You don't see much noise there, but there is a little bit. The best noise removal tool, I've always been told, and I don't have to use another product. Some people go buy other products. I don't. I just use the noise tool built into this unit. Now you notice this one was preset. I just reloaded this, so it reloaded my old algorithm, which I don't like anymore. I don't like it will default with new sharpening for some reason. So yours probably will show more sharpening. So first of all, get rid of that. Take your sharpening down. You should only sharpen at the very last step. So that creates noise. And so now a lot of that noise has gone away. However, you'll see that it is a little soft now at 100%. So I'm going to first go in. I don't need to affect the noise anymore because that noise was basically taken away. Color noise doesn't generally, in my experience, make a soft image. So feel free to use this. Don't go crazy with it. But there's a difference between gamma noise and color noise. Color noise is when pixels are changed due to over manipulation. Gamma noise, which here they just call noise, is actual the stuff that you see. This I don't know if you guys can see that on your screen. There you can. All this pixelated stuff is basically just gamma. That's not affected by color. That's just by weird exposure things that your lenses are doing from using not getting the best exposure maybe. In which case you would use this noise reduction thing to get rid of that. But make sure you're looking at it 100% whenever you do changes. Make sure you're not overdoing it. Here you'll see, again, these edges are a little soft. The other thing you can do here, do you guys see this string of purple here right along the edge? There's not much, but in bright light, you'll get what's called fringing. So I want to get rid of that. So what I then do is go into effects, optics, and here's how you get rid of the fringe. Because it's purple, I'm going to move the purple slider. Now here's how you can adjust it a little bit, left to right. You can make it more orange, you can make it more blue. Generally the middle works, but not always. So I'm going to start moving my purple amount to the right until it goes away. And there it's already gone. I might move this a little bit to the left just to see if that helps. Again, make sure you look at this at 100% or more, because if you use it too much, you'll get a gray line here, and it looks like crap if you ever have to blow up your photo. So I'm going to go a little bit less. I'm going to look here to see if there's any green. There's a little bit of green here, but now I'm being a little too anal. But I will move it just a smidge. It gets rid of the green fringing on that. The poorer quality of your lens, the more apt you are to see fringing along the edges of your things and bright edges of objects in a photograph in bright light. And it's always best to take care of it at this point. Because if you ever have to blow up the image, if Billings Clinic comes and buys a photograph and they blow up to the size of a wall, you're going to be embarrassed when you see that purple fringing on there. So, just be careful. So I've taken care of that. Now I'm going to go back to the image. I'm going to fit in the screen again. And I have this angle. I've seen some of you guys trying to play with angles. If you're deliberately trying to put an angle in an image, they call that a canted angle. Canted angles don't really work. Movie producers can use them in movies, but when they're doing an avant-garde movie of some sort. But for us in photography, you just really can't. So when I get this into Photoshop, it has to be straight horizons are your best friend. Just so, if you can avoid having, slanting horizons, do it. It's always best to get it right in the camera. I clearly didn't. I was a little anxious from it being cold. I was looking to stay alive, so I really wasn't focused on this too much. Now I'm going to open up the shadows a little bit in the oranges, so I'm going to go back to the colors again. I'm going to play with the oranges a little bit, first with luminance. I'm going to open up the oranges, which really helps a lot. And then I want to open this up a smidge, this dark area here on this face. Not much, but just a smidge. And so I'm going to go to shadows. I just slide it back and forth until I find a sweet spot that I like and I take care of it. And that's good. So then I try to look at what else I need to do. Here, it's a little soft, so I'm going to take the clarity slider. Don't overdo this. This will introduce noise. It's a little bit different effect than sharpening, but I'm going to add some clarity to it, which will boost the sharpness of the image. Again, pay attention to your noise. Do not let the noise come in. Sometimes you have to add texture So it's weird. There's a weird, what do you want to call it? There's a weird synergy between texture and noise and sharpness. If your image has no sharpness, no noise, I mean, there's no noise in a photograph or texture to it, it's hard to get it sharp, real sharp. So you have to introduce a little bit of noise, a little bit of texture to make it sharp. So that's when you're going to use texture. If you guys are trying to sharpen an image and it's just not looking right, you get too much noise, start adding a little bit of texture, and that'll help. Dehaze is a nice tool. You get those shots, sometimes you get smoke and stuff in them, or just weird lighting. It doesn't have to be smoky. This dehaze slider really works great in cases like that. The difference between a vibrance slider and saturation, both of them increase the values of your color, but the skin tones, and that means like, you know, here this might be construed as a skin tone by the computer. It doesn't accentuate the color vibrancy in those. So vibrance affects other colors, just not skin tones, where saturation increases the color tones, saturates them across the board, regardless of what color they are. All right, so this is pretty good. This is about as good as I'm going to get. So now I'm going to open it in Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my crop tool. I always crop the 2x3 when I can help it. I'm going to grab my automatic straighten tool. I'm going to draw a line, and it straightens it. The other way you can do it is by taking it and turning it and watching the line on your grid get even with the horizon. Right there. Now, don't crop yet. Now we're going to move this around to where I want this to be in the frame. So I'm putting this in the middle on this one. That was the intention of my shot in the field. And I'm going to move it so it's like, there's a term, I forget what it is. There's a term where an item, your object is exact center. And then there's a type of center that our eyes would find pleasing in the center. So if I were to move this in the center, it would include this building on the side, but it would look like it's not centered if I centered it between this line and this, pardon me, I'm on the wrong screen. It would look weird if I centered it between this line on the left and this house line on the right. So you want to, here I'm going to center the main body of the structure where I think looks good. I'd say that looks right about there. And the rule of thirds works here. I got most of the sky accentuated, and then I hit enter. Now you'll see you have to look at your edges closely to see if I cut off anything on the right. I didn't, but I did here on the top, right? Now I can't do that always, but I could here because it's sky. Because it's it's usually, if it's a very structured sky with lots of activity in it, you can't pull this off. But on skies like this, you just grab it, edit, fill, content aware, and it extends my sky in those areas. Select done. So my sky is fixed. Now, the next thing I want to do involving content aware is to take care of the shadow. So I'm going to build a box around it, being careful to keep, like here, there's just lines. I'm not worried about that. But there might be texture in the snow that I want to keep, like I did with the weeds on the left. I grab that. And again, same thing. Edit, fill, content aware. Okay. Now, before I'm done, I'm going to zoom in, and you're going to see how good a job it did. Here, it has an artifact that I need to fix. And here it copied these weeds over here. And I think that's about it. So what am I going to do? Somebody's going to notice this. A keen photographer is going to look at this and say, he used content aware. What a loser. I could have done better than that. Of course, we don't want that. So we deselect, we come in, and then I take out one of these and the shadows. It's gone. I'm going to leave those on the right. I'm going to take this out because it's kind of cut off. Take care of this while I'm here. Then I'm going to go up here, and I'm going to do it again. Grab this little blemish here through the computer. AI didn't do a good job. Edit fill and see if it does any better job. And no, better but not great. So I'm going to go in here and grab my stamp tool and do it the old-fashioned way. Zoom in. And let's see. I'm going to reach up here. You have to activate this, but I have this activated where I can pull a line down, right? And so I'm going to go like right in between the left line and the right line. I grab some pixels, kind of go down. I'm going to grab these, and kind of go up there. And then I'm going to grab my line and get rid of it. And I can see I got copied things here and here. I'm going to go through and my spot healing brush. Come on, pixels. My computer's acting up right now. I apologize. I'm just taking care of blemishes. Here's a spot on my sensor. Might as well get rid of that while I'm here. And sometimes this works, sometimes it does. This has worked okay here. I don't like that thing. I'm getting rid of it. And I took care of that blemish. And then I would probably do the same thing with, again, my computer is moving slow here. I better back this up. I've got a new desktop right. I'm on my laptop right now. I expect it to do better than this. I'm just going to save it just in case something happens. Underscore edited -1. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work on getting rid of this shadow here, which is more content aware. And then I have this shadow over on the right. I'm going to get rid of that. As soon as it lets me move my screen. So we're going to grab selection tool. And fill. By the way, you can adjust this edge. I'm using a hard edge here, and I probably shouldn't be. I should smooth it up a little bit. So I'm going to soften the edge a little bit so it blends it maybe a little bit nicer. Okay. Everything's running slow, so I'm just going to guess it's like right about there. And then I'm going to go edit, fill, content aware. Select, deselect, content aware. Edit. Fill. Content aware. Select. Deselect. And then you go through and look and see if you see any artifacts left over from your thing. There really aren't any. No, there's a sign back. There's a fiber optic sign back here. This is a symbol for fiber optic cable, which there's no business being there. So I'll get rid of it. There's a white dot that sticks out I don't like, so I'll get rid of that. And then I will look for spots in the sky, especially. Here we go. Your newer cameras, you don't have to do this as much. Actually, my camera here was a huge leap forward. It's still a little bit older. So I still have to go through here and kind of look for sensor specs on sunny days, usually only in the sky. The ones that are in the foreground tend to be masqueraded, so people don't see them. They tend to appear more on the horizon. Here, if you'll notice, this is the sweetgrass, the main hill and sweetgrass hills. You see just off in the distance. I'm going to take care of that thing. I don't like this scratch on the side of the buildings. I'm going to take care of that. I don't like this little, every little thing that jumps out at me as being odd looking that attracts your eye away from the main thing, I get rid of. Like if there was a garbage bag, oops, I don't want to do that. If there's a garbage bag on the ground, I get rid of it. Anything that takes your, view away from the image, the flow of the eyes on the screen. Yeah, that's pretty good. Now, so what do I do next? Then it's pretty well done, right? There's one step further I take. And this, I wouldn't recommend doing this until you guys have really mastered some of the techniques I've got here, which won't take long, okay? This doesn't take long. You just have to do it over and over again and get the hang of the stuff so it becomes like you develop muscle memory on some of this stuff. So what do? Well, I'm really key about color, right? You guys have heard that before. I really like color. So what do? So you go online and you can create your own actions, but it's such a time waste. So I've used a couple for me to take a look at what options there are for colorizing an image. I don't believe in color, as I've told you before, I don't believe in colorizing an image where it looks obvious that I colored it, but sometimes every photograph can use a hint of changing the color to make things leap out. The best example I can use of this is like when you're photographing forests in the mountains, everybody instinctively, if you ask them, what color is a pine tree? They'll say it's green. Well, if you look really closely in a photograph, there isn't much green in a pine tree. It tends to be just a muddled black with a hint of green. And so it's kind of contrary to what we think of, just like grass. Grass, we think of green. It's really not green. If you look at it from a pure technical point, it's more of a yellow, even though our mind registers it as green. But on a computer basis, and because of that, it sometimes renders colors not as good as they could be. So I went out and I've experimented over the years, and you guys don't have to. And by the way, if you want your own style, you don't get exactly the one I got, but there's all kinds of them out there. So I use this thing in Topaz. It used to be by Alienware. I've used it for years, and I go through, and it allows me to filter through different filters like you would Instagram. Only it's a lot more. How should I say? It's more subtle, right? And it does many more things. This is how I turn images into black and white, by the way. It's a huge time saver. So the ones I like to use the most for subtle effects is I go up here to aged, And two of them I like to use. This one doesn't work here. This one doesn't work at all. But I'll do some of these and I'll dial it back to like just a couple percent. But I can already tell none of these are going to work. So I go to my miscellaneous here. And you always find something here that kind of helps a little bit. And I'll just cycle through them. Too dark, too green. Not good enough. No. This is a neat effect, I have to admit. I always like it, but I'm too scared to use it. I like dropping the blues and just leaving the yellows and the oranges on some scenes, but I'm too scared to use too much of it. I like the blues too much. There's landscape pop. Sometimes this works. It doesn't work here. Golden hour. Actually, most of these aren't working very good, which tells you that I really didn't need. Now this one, overcast. You can click the before button. Now remember, I'm not going to use this at 100%. I'm going to use this at I'm going to dial back the opacity on whatever I do to it. Actually, none of these really worked, except for maybe this one. So just for the sake of argument, I'm going to apply it. I just hit apply. No, I can adjust these, by the way, even further, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that. So just to demonstrate that. So you can go out there. There's a million different places that can offer you stuff like this. This happens to be the one I use. You can see there's the overlay layer, and here's what this is. Now the first thing it does is it makes things, adds a little more clarity in the snow by cleaning up, making it less bright. So that's a clue to me that I left my snow a little bit too bright, and this fixes it. So what I'm going to do then is take this and dial back the opacity on it to where it doesn't even look like I added it. But it's just enough contrast to deal with the overdone highlights and stuff to make it worthwhile. I'm going to dial back just a little bit more. When in doubt, always go back. Always use less when you're applying filters or any technique on here. And I kind of like that. Now what I'm going to do is to make sure I got it right, I'm going to go and do levels adjustment, which I probably should have done earlier. Remember Alt key or your option, I think it's your option key on a Mac, and then left click auto. It pulls up this thing. Most people don't know this is here. And go through and cycle through these exposures. See what works best. This is better. And lastly, I am going to, this is another trick of mine. Watch carefully. I went into this color lookup table. I take this thing and I drop it down to 3 strip look. It accentuates the colors almost too much. And I always dial it back to about 15% to give it a little bit of a pop. So the colors leap off just a little bit more. And then I flatten it, I'm done. There. So now what do I do? Actually, I noticed this thing here. It sticks out. I don't like that. I don't like this bush here. Let me get rid of that bush. So now I'm going to save it. File save. Now notice I never sharpened it, right? I have a 16-bit image. It opened as a 16-bit image. I also didn't save the color space. The color space is still Pro Photo, but this is what Ansel Adams would call your master edited file. It's been edited. This isn't what you print from. So now a magazine publisher says, I want to use this. So then you go and you open it back up again, and you always sharpen it for the purpose that you're sharpening for. If you're sharpening this for a print, like a large print, you can afford to, and it probably behooves you to sharpen it a little bit more than you would for something for like a magazine, or if you're selling it to like stock photography. People who buy stock photography can deal with not having an image that's over sharpened or too sharp. What they don't like is noise. So in that case, my advice is to only sharpen it slightly and make sure that you just don't have noise in it as much as you can on an image. So if that ever happens, just double check your files before you send them off and look at them and just make sure that there's, not a lot of noise in the image. But here, I'm going to use this. This is going to go to a magazine. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make a copy before I send it to them, because they're going to want a JPEG. Seldom do they ever want a TIFF file or a 16-bit file. And then I'm going to look at it 100%. And I'm going to go filter, other, high pass again. And here it's set at 1. That's about right. I'm looking at these lines in here. There's no halo effect. This, oh, that's beyond halo. See that it starts to bloom up on the edges and stuff. It becomes real bright. Here, let me go over here. This is better. See this line here? There's a halo effect. So I'm going to go back to 1. There's no halo at all. I'm going to turn this layer adjustment to overlay. Play with these. That's how you learn. And then I'm just going to flick back and forth between the two and determine, is there noise? Is it sharp? It's a little bit of noise, but not much. So I might dial it back just a smidge. So again, at 100%, I am going to dial this back. Oops. That's 70%. I like that where it is. I see a dust spot right here. I'm doing this faster than I normally would. I'm going to take that. Now I'm going to save it as a JPEG. Image mode from a 16-bit to an 8-bit. Edit, convert, profile. Because it was in Pro Photo, I always got to change it to sRGB. Do not send your files out in this format. They'll wonder why they look goofy. Click OK. File, save as, desktop. Change the TIFF to a JPEG. By the way, you can create actions for this. So it's just a click of a button. I have an action for this, but you need to know what I'm doing rather than me just clicking buttons. Desktop, save. 12 always. There you go. Except for a web. You wouldn't upload an image like this to your website. Now, if somebody licensed your images for like a website, also don't send them this image, because this image is image size is 5,200 pixels wide. They don't need 5,200 pixels for a website. The most they need is 2,100. So just send them a smaller photograph. There's no, because if they say I'm only using it on the website, well, then give them an image that only can be used on a website. Don't send all those extra pixels on, so then they can turn around behind your back and make a print of it too. If they're buying it for an interior shot, then go less than 1,500 images. If they're buying it for social media, 1,500 pixels. If they're buying it for social media, they don't need anything over 1,500 pixels either. And that's how I price photographs, is based on the use. So that's what they're getting. And there, that's done. Now let's get into metadata. File info. This is your metadata screen. This is what will be ingested into AgPix or any other websites, whether you upload them to Flickr or you upload them to Shutterstock or anything. They read what's called an IP EXIF file or IPTC file. And this information is attached to the image. Video doesn't have something like this, unfortunately, but photography does. So the first thing you want to do is give it a title. Again, remember, the technology that we're building into our website will automatically give it a title if it's blank. If you don't care what it's called, then just leave it blank. We'll give it a name. But again, if you are, I have found, and it's purely anecdotal, that if you take the time to give your photos a name, it makes it easier to find them, number one, right? But the second thing is that then suddenly your customers, just because you gave it a title, they think it's art or more artsy than it really is. So, and that helps sell, frankly. So, if you're going to sell it, through any number of vendors online, Etsy, you want to give it a title. So give it a title. Otherwise, like I said, it's no biggie. It depends how you want to work. We'll give it a title based on the keywords you enter in here. Now, you want to create a template, okay? So that's what we're going to do here first. There's some information that's constant no matter what you do, right? So in my case, I'm going to go Todd, Klassy, author, and then I'm going to add a pipe, and then I'm going to add my website, www.toddklassy.com. This way, if somebody finds your photograph on the internet, they can never say they don't know how to get a hold of you. Author title, what do you want to be known as? Photographer. Description, doesn't apply. Don't click these ratings before you upload them, please, because I have to change it to nothing when they get ingested into the website. So just leave those alone if you can. Description writer, that's you. If you always write a description, so there you're going to put your name. Copyright status, always click copyright. Copyright notice. Copyright. Down the first year you photographed. In my case, it's 2005. Hyphen to the present year of this photograph. Name of your entity. LLC. Period. All rights reserved. Period. That'll be on every photograph. Copyright info URL. Put your website. Camera data. Nothing to have to worry about there. Origin. Don't have to worry about anything there. Credit line. How do you want to be credited? Photo by Todd Klassy. And I put my web address. Source. I don't think I ever put anything in there. Don't have to worry about the rest of this. Country, unless you leave the US, it's always USA. I just put that in there. Again, if you're mostly shooting in Montana, cut to the chase. Just put that in there. It's easier to fix it later if you happen to visit Washington or something later. It'll still save you time. IPTC. Put your address in here. Put your city, state, postcard, country, your phone number, email, website. Intellectual genre. You put down photography. You can do the rest of the stuff, but you don't have to. It's not important. But that information will be stored on your photograph. So if anybody finds it on their hard drive years later, after 3 people got fired, they know how to get a hold of you. And then when you're done, template exports and saves it as a, say, default. See down here, it's saving as an XMP file. Click save. Okay. Now the next time you go on out of a photograph, and you go to File Info, Templates, listed here, and you want to clear existing properties or replace with template properties. If you already have stuff on there, you don't want to be erased, don't use that. You can say you keep original metadata, replace matching properties from templates. So it'll keep your empty files, but replace what you have here. This is handy at the end of the year when you need to update your copyright, maybe on a bunch of images from 2003 to 2024. Or keep original metadata, but append, it means add to matching properties from the templates. So here, I mean, I don't, this is a new image, doesn't care. I click OK, and then it automatically added that information to the file. And then now you save it as a JPEG for uploading to AgPix, or you save it as a file you're going to your customer. Now, the one thing that was missed here, basic description keywords. I don't know how fast you type, okay? I type rather fast. So I generally will get about 10 to 20 keywords in there. The technology we're going to have isn't going to require that, except on objects where you may not think the AI, artificial intelligence algorithm we have isn't going to be able to tell what's in this scene. It will be able to tell that there's snow here, comma. I doubt it will be able to tell that's a grain elevator. Well, it might, but you put it down anyhow. That's the most important thing in this image, right? It's also sunny. So tell the weather. What time of year is it? Winter. A blue sky. Cold. What is it? Rural. Where? But always put the state in the keywords. That's important. Or any other regional geographical information. In the case of this, and for some of you, you may not understand the importance of it, but highline is important for this photograph regionally. It'll also boost your sales if you know what the geographical reference is. So you'll get more local sales if you can refer to that. You know, for you in Broadus, you know, you would put down Eastern Montana, or you know, something valley. I don't know, the Bitterroot Valley. You know, Kelly, where you are, if you shoot down in that area. So if there's a regional nomenclature that applies to that area that people use on a widespread basis. If it's not used on a widespread basis, don't worry about it. But you know, Bitterroot Valley is used a lot, so that's one you'd want to use. For those that live up on Highway 2, almost everybody refers it to as the High Line, so you want to include that. And then you want to include, you know, some basic color data. Even though our algorithm will pluck the relevant color data from it and provide a palette to those searching for the photos. Here I would add orange because it's an important color kind of in this scene. I would also add the word wooden. It's a wooden grain elevator. I would also write down the word abandoned. Rustic. I'll give it a few adjectives. Lonely. Alone. Tall. Afternoon. Time of day. There's no people here, so you put nobody. If there's a person in it, you put person. If there's more than one, you put people. And you give it that information. And now the algorithm will pluck images from here, and it will add a superlative. That's a word that kind of just doesn't mean anything, but it just adds some ambiance to an image. So the algorithm will probably come back and call this snowy grain elevator joy, you know, or something that's, you know, doesn't really, but it just gives it a name. And so that's how the algorithm will work, among other ways. And then you click OK. And then you send it to AgPix via your Google Drive folder. And then we will upload it. Oh no, then we'll grade it. We'll break it down into 3 categories for you in your folder. We will move it into uploading. We're going to upload it to maybe it needs some more work, or to no, it won't work. And that's basically it. Real quick. Shot on the same day. Here's one where it's much darker, but because it compensated for the sun, this is one of those where it's tough to do. You take your shadow slider and move it all the way to the right. Hope for the best. Landscape, vivid. Let me do this one quick. I'll go through all the things here quick. Landscape works. It's a little too cold. I'm going to warm it up. Not too much. I'm going to go to my mixer. I have to figure out what these are here. I think they're purples. There's some purples in there. Doesn't really help. Let's see if I can do something with that sky. Not much. I'm going to go back to mixer. I'm going to saturate my oranges in the grain elevator some. And I'm going to try to make them a little bit lighter so they stick out. Then back to the oranges. There. To there. And then we go to clarity. Clarity really does some nice on those weeds in the foreground, but I have to double check to see what it does for noise. A little noisy. So let's see if we take out some next texture that helps. Go to detail, take away the sharpening, noise reduction, not too much. Increase color noise reduction. Open. Selector tool. I like this lens flare. Edit, fill, content aware. See what it does. Select, deselect, zoom. I don't like this. I don't like this. Even though it would pass, I don't like it. It's not what I was hoping the cloud would look like. Edit, fill, unaware, reload. That's better. Select, deselect, brush. I'm going to clean this up just a smidge. And I'm going to grab my rubber stamp tool. They had a little more texture added in from like here. Dial back the opacity. There. That's just preference. Now, I'm going to grab my Horizon tool. By the way, in case you're wondering, this was the scene that was shot directly behind where I fell into the ditch at the same time. Okay, let's see. I don't want to get rid of these weeds in the foreground too much. I like that weed in the corner. It's not the best use of this photograph though, but I like that those weeds too much. I wish it was more over here, but again, I wasn't thinking about composition as much. So there's that. That's actually not bad right there where it is, even color-wise. Now, what I might do is, they say not to use this sharpening tool here. I don't know. I use it sometimes for some straightforward cleanup. What I want to do is accentuate the sun rays here a little bit. So I'm going to try to sharpen these one ray at a time in between the rays. Again, don't go too far. Make sure you're looking for introducing noise underneath where you're using this. There might be another tool that might work. You probably, I'm not sure you're familiar with this, but if you go to filter, liquify. Is there anybody here who has used liquify? Is that, yeah, of course you would. Is that Jessica? Okay, well, liquify is handy for contorting bodies more than anything, but it has other uses too. Bloats, pucker. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to try it. I'm going to pinch the sun and see if I can. Oh. That helped a little bit. Yeah, it helped a little bit. What it does is it puckers, it pinches it, and it kind of squeezes stuff in the center of it. Where it really comes in handy. I don't know if I should share this or not, but this is the best example of how I've used this in the past. And by the way, this wasn't me just doing it, right? It was to allay. I had a young cowgirl who was overlooking my shoulder when I did this, and she said, who's a friend, by the way, I might also point that out, who said, I took this photograph, and she said, I love this photograph. I said, I love this photograph. This is awesome. And she said, I hate it. And I said, why? I says, because I look like a boy. I said, what do you mean you look like a boy? You don't look like a boy to me. What the hell are you talking about? She goes, no, I look like a boy. So I took that tool, Liquify, and I just gave her a bump. And it moves her chest out a little bit. And I go, how's that? She goes, perfect. And I use that in all my other photos. So again, you don't want to remove history, but like when I do wedding shots, and I don't do weddings anymore, I would give women a little tuck in their midsection, and I would give shoulders on the men a little bit up, a little bit more. Not like the 1980s style, where we were all walking around with stuffed shoulder pads, anything like that. But, and you can move certain things that a person might be, what's the word? Have some vanity about, and you can kind of fix those things or make them, if they have a mold, you can make it look a little smaller. That's what that tool's for. Again, I don't use it a whole lot, but there are instances where it does, frankly, come in handy. And it usually, again, your goal is to make the other person feel better about themselves, not worse. So it does come in handy in that regard. And here I was able to make that kind of more starburst like, and not just a blurb in there. Now this has got purposely, it's got a little, it's not too contrasty, which I kind of like, but I'm going to look at to see what it looks like as I add what the computer thinks it should look like, just in case. 'Cause, 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 I don't know. I kind of like that too. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to go with this. I might dial it back a little bit. Flatten. I see a little weird thing in the sky up here that's kind of caught my eye, which I don't like, because I want the focus to be on the grain elevator in the sun. So I got rid of it. That was an easy one to photograph. I just hadn't, or to edit. I didn't really use that one much before. I also don't like this little thing over here. And I'll go through and I'll clean up the sky as far as dust spots are concerned later. I don't need to waste your time doing that. But that was a quick edit, relatively. So right now, that's all I had for tonight, except I don't want to do these on our oops. TIFF. Save. Done. 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 5H. I want to do these when we do these meetings as opposed to the other ones to waste our time when we're talking shop. Inspirational shots. Have you guys seen this photograph before? Has anybody seen this before? If you haven't, you should know it because it's one of the most sold pieces of art on multiple websites from Etsy to Fine Art America to whatever. This shot where the photographer added these frames into the picture. These frames are part of the picture. They were added and then just put a nice like windowsill kind of molding around it. And people eat this stuff up. There's lots of social media influencers on YouTube who have this hanging in their kitchen. They think this is the cat's meow, no pun intended. They just love this shot. So this is another example of, close up of cows behaving like cows are shots that are worth money. So now kudos to the photographer who had the foresight to do all this jazz with the things, but I thought I'd make you aware. And it's not an exceptional photograph, right? What sold it is that he was able to match pretty well the frame he added to the photograph for the trim, which took a great deal of time, I'm sure. But still, people love shots like that. So if you have a chance to get them, get them. Here's a nice little. Remember I told you that the background shots don't work, or from behind shots don't work on farm implements. Actually, it does if you're trying to showcase the implement itself. So if you're out and about and people are like seeding this spring and you're seeing work in the field, especially if you got good sunlight, don't forget get shots like this. People like those. Again, notice the negative space up here in the upper left-hand corner. Now, this was one that was used in social media. Here they put their logo down here, but again, this was probably a 2/3 crop shot, and he probably cropped to the right, and there's probably more negative space off here to the left. So that's how you want to compose that. This, by the way, I showed this only because there's no way you or I could make this shot very easily. This shot, they use a ton of extra lighting. See how this field has all this lighting here at dusk? There's no way the lights on this or even vehicles off camera are making this. I guarantee you there's a big bank of shots in here that are making this photograph. This is how the big boys photograph their equipment. Shots of calves like this are golden. If you guys can get some close-ups of some, black Angus or red Angus or any kind of calves in the morning, the only problem with this one is they didn't clean the eye boogers out, which I'm disappointed they didn't do it. Plus, this one's a little soft too, but still, and it's too dark, a little too dark on the right side, other side. But still, people love shots like this. Not a good shot, but it demonstrates, especially for drovers, if you got some young, especially if they're not too dirty like these are, But if you can get some shots of your calves nursing with cows, photograph them. This doesn't apply to us, but if we're doing these portraits, if you can get them out in a field like this of anything, these are the kind of portraits you should do. Use a very shallow depth of field and a long focal length. This lens is probably made with at least a 200 millimeter lens, if not closer to 300, 400 millimeters. So you get this drop off in the background with probably an f4 aperture, I'm guessing. And they probably even used a little Photoshop trickery to even blend it even more. But if you can get shots like this on a farm, this is the kind of shots that would work great if you're dealing like with a new wheat field, a field of grass, even wheat stubble, frankly, or a hay field or anything. If in their crops to do shot, again, these people are dressed up for the occasion. They're in a lavender field or I don't know what they're in. But, this was well planned. The stuff we shoot, they're not going to be made up as much as this usually. But this would just be a nice family portrait shot if you have it in whatever it is that they grow on the farm. This is just a shot to demonstrate the importance of getting low angle and how to use your surroundings. Here they use the puddle. This is a good documentary type style shot. But the two things it demonstrates is, if you've got puddles out there, use them for reflections. But more importantly, these low angle shots work great when you're dealing with cowboys or cowgirls. It kind of elevates their status, which most Americans see them as being, superhero-ish. And that low angle shot, looking up at them, works well in situations like that. It's a drone shot, but what this demonstrates is, again, having all the lights on the vehicles and using your backgrounds well. I mean, this tells the story of somewhere that could very well be Montana, with the mountains in the background. It's probably more like Colorado, probably, or Utah or something. But still, nonetheless, here that the focus is on the equipment again, not so much on the tractor. Just landscape shot with product in the background, shooting into the sun. This is great for stock photography because why? You can't, you and I know, if you grew up in a farm, this is a John Deere, right? But you don't see the logo anywhere. There's usually a logo right under here underneath the glass. It was easy for them to use Photoshop to delete it. And because it's backlit, you can't really tell what it is. So companies will use this all day long and John Deere won't get upset for for an advertising for their product. So backlit works real well here to kind of blend out the color of the unit and the trademarks of John Deere. So these shots work great for stock photography. This is a boring photograph, but what's cool about it is if it's part of a story, here's the farmer. Again, I would have gone a little tighter, maybe. But these shots during the blue hour after the sun's gone down, showing the farmer coming home late, tells a story. This is great for an article. This is not something that's going to hang on a wall, but part of a greater piece, very valuable. Again, another cool story. If you're doing these generational shots on a farm or ranch are very important. Now, I don't know what happened here, if the photographer told them to laugh. I kind of doubt it. These laughs seem just a little too genuine. When you're doing photography for portraits, remember to engage the people you're photographing. Don't just photograph them. Talk to them. Try to make them laugh. Elicit a response. There was a photographer, and I don't approve of this style, but this was a photographer who was photographing rich people out in New York City back in the 70s. And he had a sterile white background, and it was like they were like older, like 60s, 70s, and they were like the total elite rich that you would think of from Manhattan or Madison Avenue, New York. And right before he clicked the shutter, he would say to him, "Did you know your dog died?" Or something about their dog dying. And they give this immediate look of horror on their face instinctively. And that's when he would click the shutter. He would get these very bizarre but very cool photographs, portraits of these people. And of course so the opposite holds true. If you can think of something funny or ask them to tell you a funny story, Do you remember the last time that happened? And then they'll start, farmers will, especially when they're around their son or daughter or whatever, they'll come up with some dandies and they'll start laughing. And that's when you want to start clicking the shutter. I don't like the fact that this fence is in the middle of this, but here they're feeding animals. Tells another great story. Here, sitting down at the diner sometimes, or the dinner table, sometimes that's a good shot. Anytime they're around their equipment in their sheds, good shots. But right in the bay door where the sun's coming in and it makes everything in the background dark, great shot here. This is what I like to do. I like not so much sitting on the fence. It's like when that sun gets low on the horizon, find holes for that sun to sneak through. My best example of that is, well, I have several, but here I have one. It just jumps up right out of the bat. What happened? Way down here. Sorry. This is another reason why I don't use filters, but here it's just off screen, the sun again. I do that a lot. And then the lens flare comes up and it actually adds to this photo. So that works well. But the other one is when you're photographing, and sometimes you have to take a lot of photographs if they're moving to catch it. This is the one that I did out of Rocky Boy. Now, this one could have been done better if I'd used a different filter. I won't get into that in the story. But here, the sun was shining through the arm and the side of his body. And this took a long time to get that lined up as he was dancing and doing his Indian dance. But I've sold this photograph like crazy. So when you're out there playing with the sunlight, right? This one was probably backlit a little bit, or meaning that they might have used a flash here a little bit. I can't tell. But it just means you have to adjust your exposure. Don't leave this too dark back here like it normally would. You have to kind of compensate, and so that you can expose this properly to perfectly take advantage of that effect. Feedlot photos, if you have access to them, photograph them. Drove roll by them all day long. Any precision agriculture you guys see out there, people using GPS in the tractor, people using drones, people using iPads in the field, things like that, photograph them. They're worth $1 bazillion. This is a painting, but what a great way for you to frame an image if you're out at a branding. The Cowboys hate it, but if you can get them to all line up in a row like this, and maybe have a couple of them kneel like this is a great panner. This is the kind of shot that a family would put on a wall for generations. It's just a great way to. This is a beautiful, framed image of a bunch of men out at the corral, or out at the on branding day when they're all kind of dressed up. Again, more feedlot shots using technology in the field. Even if if it's somebody that's with you, there's this doesn't have to be a farmer, but it implies that here you got a field in the background. They're fiddling on their iPhone. That's important. Those are good shots. Again, another shot of a grain elevator I saw online. Somebody was great. They get down into the grass to dapple it a little bit with some growth in the foreground. So that's what I have for this month. Questions? No one has a question? Someone has a question. Oh, come on. Really? It couldn't have been that thorough. What didn't you? Okay, I'll ask the question. What didn't you understand? You understood everything perfectly? Come on.
That was a lot.
Excuse me?
That was a lot for me.
Which part, well, what was a lot? The editing?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Photoshop.
Well, I think again, 50% of it is in Adobe Raw, right? if you, which are the sliders I'm using Adobe Raw, is essentially everything you have those exact same tools in your software.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there. It's the same engine that your software uses. So you just have to use it kind of the same way. Now, the problem with but you also have the tools, like you can deal with dust specks with Lightroom too, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Um, and you can adjust the colors too. If I remember correctly, I've used it. It's a little more cumbersome in Lightroom dealing with colors, but again, just reopen your, just either. I mean, but I think the methodology is still the same. I think the tools are still there. You just have to do a little bit backwards engineering, kind of do the same thing as I'm doing. Pull up my video and edit the photograph in the same sequence I edit mine. The only other thing that I do that I'm sure you can't do in Lightroom is the way I sharpen photographs. But the procedure is still the same from the standpoint, don't sharpen your photographs until you know what its intended purpose is. If I was photographing that one photograph that I did with a high pass setting of 1, I probably would have doubled it if I'd known it was going to be blown up into a large print. So just keep that in mind. But all that stuff can be done in your Lightroom. You just apply the same methodology. And it just means and if you get to a point, Kelly or anybody else is using Lightroom, and you can't figure out how to duplicate the same procedure in Lightroom, then let me know and we'll look online together and find the answer.
Okay. I think I just need to go through your editing and give it a try on Lightroom.
Well, and we can, I have Lightroom too, by the way, Kelly. So, this spring when you go out and make a pile of photos, let's just, set some time aside. I'll edit them on Lightroom, and you can point me maybe to where some of the controls are. But we'll figure it out together.
Okay.
Develop your own style and approach. Alexis, what are you using for editing?
Primarily Lightroom, but I have access to Raw and Photoshop.
Okay. Well, I would try doing a little bit of both. There's probably a procedure out there where using both of them is suitable, right? Not every photograph. I know that not every photograph that I edit needs to go through Lightroom. But if I just used Adobe Camera Raw, which is, again, the same engine that Lightroom uses, there's not much I would need to use Photoshop for. It's just that's what I grew up with, and that's what I'm familiar with more than anything. And I do like to, is there a content, or is there a, what do you want to call it? Does Lightroom have the ability to remove objects like I was doing in the snow and stuff? Or are you able to do that in Lightroom?
Yeah, you can remove things and there's a Band-Aid option on there, and it'll, just like you were doing, cleaning up the sky, the spots, the removing objects. And
the difference is you don't have layers, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so you can't really adjust the opacity of stuff. Well, then you do the opposite's true. You do all the editing you can do in Lightroom, and then if you need to fix something because you can do it in Photoshop, then you just open it quick in Photoshop and make the quick changes and save it. That's what I would do, but that's up to you guys. And again, as always, if you get it right in the camera, you don't have to do as much in the Photoshop, Photoshop, to be honest with you. The other thing to keep in mind too, when you're out there shooting, one of the other benefits of Photoshop is if you're doing panoramas. If you're doing panoramic shots, and this helps for doing those 2-page spread photos. If you come onto a scene where it's static, meaning that you don't have things that are moving, like a landscape scene, for example, take your picture aimed at what you're shooting, but then pivot a little bit to the left, make sure the frames are overlapping, and take another photograph. Photoshop, in less than a minute, can stitch those two photos together so you can create a 4x1 image that's 1 unit high and 4 inches wide, 4 units wide. And that can make, especially if it's a beautiful scene, Those make great sources for prints, but it also gives you just enough extra pixels out there so that you can more easily make a spread type image for a magazine. And it's seamless. You can't tell that the two images were stitched together. But again, they have to be static. If there's cows flapping their tails or something like that, or the trees are moving very hard in the wind, it probably wouldn't work so well. There'd be some obvious thing going on with the scene. But I photographed the waterfall, one of the waterfalls outside of Great Falls, and it was 3 images high by, I forget now, 7 or 8 images long. So it was like 24 total images that I had to overlap to create one massive file that could be printed. So it was printed 11 feet tall by, God, I forget how long it was, 60 feet wide. But it's in the Great Falls International Airport when the customers land at the airport. And that was all done using Photoshop's stitch feature. It didn't take long to stitch it. What took long was the computer crunching every move I had to make on such a large file. That was painful. But as far as stitching it, it's real simple. So, don't forget to do shots like that if you don't think that the standard 2:3 aspect ratio of your image that you see through the viewfinder is enough to be able to tell the story. And people from a print's perspective, they love shots that are super long like that, the panorama shots. Jessica, what are you using? Are you using Photoshop or are you using Lightroom? Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to put the phone back down now. Jessica says she uses Lightroom mostly, but she does the heavy lifting in Photoshop. She adjusts all the colors and stuff in there. She says there is a tool in Lightroom that allows you to kind of sharpen, somewhat similar to what I was using in Photoshop. And she found it interesting the way I did it. The best feature about the way I edit a photograph is if you have an image that does have noise in it, particularly in the sky, you can go in there with that gray paintbrush, right, and paint out where you don't want the sharpening. So you can apply it, just to the foreground or just to the face or what have you, where the noise isn't introduced or where you don't care as much about noise being introduced. So that's the beauty of it. It's not just it does a better job sharpening, but I can go in there and remove it where I don't want any. So I can apply sharpening in just those areas that I want sharpening. And it's super quick and super easy in that regard. So that's the beauty of doing the high pass. All the pros that I know use a high pass overlay method of sharpening. There might be better ideas out there now, but everyone I've ever talked to, of course, it's been years since I've ever brought it up, but that's the technique, at least for a long time. I'm pretty sure it's still used. Most pros that I know use Photoshop. Lightroom is more of a, and this isn't always the case. But Lightroom was used more, by my experience, by people who do wedding photography because they have such a mass of images to edit. Where I'm doing mine a little more selectively, I guess. You have to provide the customer like 100 images. In that case, Lightroom might speed up that process a little bit more, I suspect. But the other case is, prosumers who didn't really need to know how to do color matching and all the bells and whistles. I mean, I only used, if I'm lucky, 10% of the things that Photoshop can do, if that. And there's so much more it can do. I wish I knew so much more. But that's another reason why I use it, because it's kind of fun to learn. I can still learn on that, and I enjoy doing that, I guess, with Photoshop. I can tinker with it a little bit more, I guess. Whatever. So, do do whatever what makes it easy and comfortable for you. I don't tell people what to do because, I approach my business a certain way. There's some things that are time consuming that aren't going to make me money, and I just don't waste time and money on those. But and you should do the same way. If there's things I'm doing that you just don't need to waste your time and money, well then do the process your way. I'm okay with that. But the theory that I apply, I think, hopefully comes through, and you guys see that that's the most important part, that it works no matter what system you're using. Ansel Adams, what do you want to call it? What do you refer to it? He called it his why am I drawing a blank? Zone. His zone system is by far the best way to approach digital photo editing. Again, remember, every type of exposure has a different zone. The black here is one zone. This foreground is another zone. This bright white is another zone. And you should be editing each, both from an exposure standpoint as well as a color standpoint, in its own way. These requires a certain type of editing that you can't do here. And when you can meld that together, you're creating kind of a composite image that allows it to leap off a screen or off of a page much better. He did this with analog devices. Where I'm burning in and adjusting the exposure, Ansel Adams stood there with a paddle to prevent the light coming through from the unit that was exposing a piece of photo paper from a negative. The same tools. In fact, the names of our tools here. Blur. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Dodge is a term from the Ansel Adams days. It dodged the light. And then burn, you're burning in the light. And the sponge tool was used because to refer to saturation, because when you poured chemical on an image to make it more colorful, you were using a sponge to apply it selectively on a photo negative or on a piece of photo paper. So the terms from the analog days, again, the same theory applies to a digital darkroom, just like we did here. So again, it doesn't matter what tool you're using, just as long as you're following kind of the same principle. That's what matters. All right. If that's it, this is the week I am doing a big extra ad buy for the stuff for branding. Any of you guys doing a branding shoot? I know, Kelly, you're not. How about, I know Jessica is. Alexis, do you do any branding shoots, or do you kind of just stay within the farming realm?
I'm more so with it just in the farming realm. I don't have any branding shoots set up.
Okay. Did you want to do one down in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, I'd be game to go do one.
Okay. Well, let me reach out to some friends I have down in your neck, because you have. How far is Tostin from you? Am I pronouncing that right?
Tostin?
How do you pronounce it?
Tostin.
Tostin. That's a Tostin. Tostin. Yeah. How far are you from Tostin?
It's close. It's like less than 40 minutes.
Then how far are you from White Sulphur Springs?
From White Sulphur.
Hour and a half?
Hour 10.
Yeah, hour 10-ish.
Well, I have friends in both places. So if you want to spend a Saturday trying to your game at there's potentially money for you down in your valley there. I mean, the beauty of where you are, there's lots of unique agriculture going on there, right? Compared
Absolutely.
to the rest of the state. I mean, you're in a wonderful place. But then you also have some of the most beautiful backgrounds too. When you got the what are the mountains to the south?
South.
Gallatin Range, the Gallatin Range. That Gallatin Range produces just when wheat harvest, figure out where your wheat fields are now, because those looming, especially the Gallatin range, there's some great valleys through there where they plant wheat. And if you can, nail that at the same time they're out there with the harvesters, so you can get, the harvesters, harvesting wheat with the mountains in the background, you have great backgrounds down there. Just, I mean, I can't begin to tell you how valuable they are. So be sure to take advantage of it. To tell you, and this is just it's the same photograph I would take in, what do you call it, up on the High Line. It would nary get a look. I have a million shots. You can see all these shots here of grain bins and stuff, and they're popular. But you get one with some mountains in the background like you have down there, and everybody wants the damn photo. So, learn my lesson, okay? Especially when wheat harvest happens, or if you can find someone who's branding cattle with the mountains, in the background. These are the bridges, I think. I forget what.
Yeah,
it is.
I think I know where those
You know
5
those
grain
are?
bins are actually.
It's like not far from you. You're in Belgrade, right?
Yeah, that looks like it's just past kind of between Manhattan and Churchill on
Bingo.
Stagecoach. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I got lost in those roads back there, but luckily I looked at my rearview mirror and I saw this down the valley and up the hill again across from me, and I snapped a shot. And I've sold this numerous times. It's just a stupid grain bin photo. Honestly, it's no different than this one or any of these, but because it's all flat, I can't sell the damn things. So yeah, anything out there in those valleys where you can add agriculture and mountains, you're blessed. I'm telling you. So, and I'm going to talk to you later this week. You emailed me about that other thing about this one's sold actually, but again, I got mountains back there. They're off in a distance, but shit. And then you got potato harvest and the things you're doing at your business right now, which probably have you pretty busy this year. But
Yep.
Of course, but again, later in the year when everybody's growing stuff, you'll be more free. There'll be lots of opportunities there. So
Absolutely.
we'll talk later this week if you got time, and I'll see if I can find you a branding if you want to do it sometime on the weekend, just to experience. It's a little awe-shaking at first, but it's quite unique. And ask if you have any, down in that neck of the woods, you have to know some ranchers. The trick is you got to find someone who does it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't want to go out there where you don't want to do the four-wheelers and the branding tables and the hydraulics and all that jazz. That's boring. You want to do it where they're dressed up like cowboys and they're roping and that sort of thing. But okay. Okie dokie. That's all I got. If you guys got any questions, email me and I will chat with you guys later.
Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, Todd.
Have a good night.
You too.